"You're lucky we don't press charges for threats, Mr. Knox," Deidre Mallon said, holding out the violation like she was serving a warrant. "Concealing weapons on HOA property is a serious offense." My daughter stood behind me, frozen. Her sweatshirt shifted slightly, the edge of her spinal brace visible for anyone with eyes and half a soul. But Deidre wasn't looking for truth. She was looking for blood. "This is your official notice. Your daughter is banned from the community clubhouse, tennis courts, and walking trails until the board completes its safety review." "You're calling a medical brace a weapon?" I said quietly. "That footage you clipped still pings back to the original vendor server. I've already accessed the unedited version." She blinked. "You might want to hit subscribe before this hearing airs, because once that courtroom video drops, you'll want to say you knew how it started. Name's Aurelian Knox. I analyze digital evidence for a living. Chain of custody, metadata audits, you name it. I spent 17 years at the DOJ catching federal contractors who thought deleting frames made them ghosts. These days, I help attorneys dismantle tampered surveillance with frame-by-frame reconstructions. I'm not the kind of neighbor you frame with a grainy clip, but Deidre Mallon, president of the Stone Hollow Ridge HOA, didn't know that. She saw a quiet man with a teenage daughter and a subdued yard, not someone who writes forensic breakdowns for national trials. And when she saw Elena adjusting her hoodie at the community sundial, a place my daughter helped restore during her freshman year, Deidre saw an opportunity to flex authority. Elena wears that brace because she has scoliosis that nearly shattered her L3 disc before she turned 15. It's steel reinforced, medical grade, and custom fitted to help her stand without pain. She wears it under her clothes because she doesn't want stares. The same week Deidre's weapon warning went live on the HOA's digital bulletin, Elena was prepping to present her biometric tracking project at MIT's Winter Summit. It wasn't just a lie. It was a slow kill to her future, and I knew it the second I read the violation form. The HOA didn't just call her dangerous, they called her ineligible for everything. You should have seen her when we got home. She didn't speak. Just stood in the entryway, her hands shaking slightly, like the weight of the accusation made her brace even heavier. I didn't have to ask what she was feeling. I'd seen that look before, on a witness who knew she was being set up, but didn't have the tools to fight back. But I do. I looked at the signature on the bottom of the violation. D. Mallon, typed like a badge, like a dare. That signature wasn't going to hold up for long. The footage was already in my possession. 13 seconds missing. Transitions jump cut, no timecode watermark, likely a re-exported MP4 with embedded audio stripped and relayered. Sloppy. I didn't tell Deidre any of that. I just took the violation slip from her hand without blinking, stepped back onto my porch, and shut the door. She probably thought I was retreating. She'd learn soon enough. She didn't even wait for the door to close. I heard her heels pivot sharply on the concrete, muttering something to herself about non-compliance as she walked off, probably rehearsing the next violation she'd file. Inside, Elena hadn't moved, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, her other hand gripping the kitchen counter like it was the only thing holding her up. She said, "Weapons," she whispered. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to soften the truth. Deidre had taken a swing at her reputation, and in a place like Stone Hollow Ridge, reputation was currency. Once the board labeled you a safety risk, it followed you, into neighborhood chatter, into application letters, into silence. Elena dropped her backpack and disappeared into the hallway. I didn't follow. Instead, I turned on my phone and opened the HOA portal. The violation was already live, time-stamped 32 minutes earlier, before Deidre even showed up at our door. That meant she had every intention of going public before giving me the chance to respond. And sure enough, there it was. The headline in bold, "Incident involving resident minor under board review. Precautionary access restrictions in effect." I scrolled further and found comments already forming beneath the post. Not again. Third time this year? Is anyone surprised? No names, of course. That would be against policy. But everyone knew who it was. Elena was the only teen girl who still walked home through the Central Park path. She liked the sundial, said it helped her stay centered when the pain crept in mid-afternoon. I needed to see if this was part of a larger pattern. So I left her to rest and drove 10 minutes to the south end of the neighborhood, an older cul-de-sac where some of the HOA's influence wore thin around the edges. The coffee shop there was an official Stone Hollow property, which made it neutral ground. It also happened to be where the homeowners who didn't care for Deidre's reign liked to quietly share updates. Thomas Carrick waved me over the moment I stepped inside. He didn't say anything, just handed me his phone with a screenshot of a message thread. It was from his neighbor, sent 2 weeks ago. HOA flagged my wife for loitering with intent. She was stretching after a jog. Below it, another from a retired school teacher. They stopped my grandson from entering the clubhouse because he had a toolkit in his backpack, said he could alter infrastructure. This wasn't about safety, it was about image control. And now I had 3 other cases. Quiet ones, yes, but enough to build a trail. Elena's name isn't on anything yet, Thomas said. But you know Deidre. First the bulletin, then the doorsteps. Half the neighborhood already thinks something happened. I nodded. The tactic was always the same. Float the accusation publicly without committing to anything legally actionable. That way, if you pushed back, they'd claim you were being defensive. But if you stayed quiet, the silence became an admission. I'm not staying quiet, I said. He didn't smile, but he nodded once, hard and slow, before turning back to his laptop. Outside, the sun had started to dip, painting long shadows across the sidewalks. I took the back route home, looping past the clubhouse where a couple of board members were chatting near the bike racks. One of them glanced at me, then turned away quickly. The other just kept talking, louder now. They weren't worried. Not yet. Back home, Elena was asleep on the couch, curled beneath the weighted blanket I got her after her last round of spinal treatment. I tucked it tighter around her and sat nearby, scrolling back through the HOA bulletin archives. That's when I found it. 2 months ago, buried between landscaping reminders and noise complaint policy, was a new bylaw clause. Temporary precautionary grounds access limitations. It gave the board power to restrict any resident's access to community property pending review without needing to file formal charges. I stared at the phrasing. It was smart, non-binding, non-specific, and timed just after an incident involving a black teenager visiting family during spring break. No name mentioned there either. That's when I knew this wasn't just about Elena's brace. It was about who was allowed to be seen, and who wasn't. That meant I wasn't fighting a violation anymore. I was fighting a strategy, and I knew how to dismantle those, from the inside out. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, 2 days after the violation went live. Not the kind of meeting where decisions are made, more like a performance where the audience doesn't realize the script was already written. I wasn't interested in speaking, but I needed to be in the room. I needed to see who sat silently while Deidre sold lies. They held it at the Stone Hollow Ridge Pavilion, the one with those pointless granite columns and recessed lighting that buzzed just loud enough to give you a headache. I arrived early and took a seat near the back, where I could watch the faces that didn't want to be watched. Deidre stood at the front like she always did, arms folded, chin lifted just high enough to remind everyone that the microphone was hers. 2 other board members flanked her, eyes glazed over. Then there was Stellan Vereen, vice president, graying at the edges. Always looked like he was one polite nod away from collapsing into dust. He kept his gaze down as she opened the meeting with a reminder of our community's core values: safety, respect, and visual harmony. Then she got to the incident. Out of concern for resident well-being, she said, the board has initiated a review of behavior deemed potentially unsafe, involving an underage resident observed near shared amenities, while displaying signs of suspicious concealment. As a precaution, limited access restrictions have been enacted until this review concludes. No names, no specifics, just enough bureaucratic fog to blur the lines. But I saw something then, Stellan shifting in his seat, not dramatically, just a subtle tilt, like he didn't want his name on what was coming next. I filed that away. His silence wasn't agreement, it was discomfort. A woman behind me leaned forward and whispered to her husband, "You think it's that girl with the brace?" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. I didn't stay for the rest. I slipped out the side exit and circled around the back of the pavilion, just in time to catch Stellan stepping out for air. He lit a cigarette and stared out across the lawn. "You ever wonder," I said from a few feet back, What happens when someone tries to redact metadata but forgets the timestamp on the second audio layer? He turned slowly, cigarette frozen midair. I remember you from that drone permit dispute last year, he said. You wrote the data summary they used in court. Guilty. He blew smoke upward. This isn't about drones. No, it's about a girl with a medical brace being framed as a threat to public safety. He didn't respond, but he didn't walk away either. That was something. I'm not asking you to take my side, I said, but you know that clip was cut. Too clean, too short, no motion blur in the final 2 seconds. Either Deidre edited it herself, or she asked someone to do it. He tapped ash off the cigarette and exhaled through his nose. I didn't cut anything, he said. I just approved the bulletin. I didn't flinch. Approval is authorship when it causes harm. He looked at me then, really looked. Do you have the original? I will. He nodded once, but didn't say anything else. I walked away. Stellan wasn't ready to be useful, but he wasn't siding with Deidre either. That meant pressure could work, not threats, not noise, just exposure. If he thought the board's silence could shield him, he'd stay quiet. But if he realized silence might turn into liability, he'd move. I went home and backed up everything I had. 2 pulled frame logs, sync offsets, time differential comparisons between HOA bulletin post and server activity. Enough to build a trail, not enough to drop the hammer, not yet. But I had a lever now, a crack in the board's wall, and all I needed was the right weight. The next day the email came just after noon. Subject line: Community Safety Expansion Protocol. Immediate enactment sender: Stone Hollow Ridge. HOA Administration. Attachment: PDF. Notice now 4B, enhancement.pdf. I didn't need to open it to know what it was, but I opened it anyway. The new policy was titled Enhanced Provisional Oversight. Effective immediately, it granted the board authority to extend access restrictions to any resident deemed adjacent to an active safety concern. It was a thin veil over the same rotten game, this time aimed at me. I scrolled to the final clause. Family members or guardians of involved individuals may be temporarily denied use of shared spaces during active review cycles. They were banning me now. Not just Elena, me. From the gym, the pool, even the HOA conference room I'd used twice before for legal seminars. My badge key card would be deactivated by 5 p.m. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer than I should have. Then I picked up the phone and called the surveillance vendor listed in the community contract. Orion Visual. The woman who answered spoke with the kind of cadence that told me she hated confrontation and had to deal with a lot of it. Hi, this is Aurelian Knox. I'm a resident at Stone Hollow Ridge. I'm calling to request preservation of surveillance footage from camera 14B dated last Monday between 4 Ikes and 4:30 p.m. Specifically raw uploads, no processed derivatives. Sir, we need that request to come through your HOA board or legal subpoena. I've initiated both, but if that footage disappears before either arrives, I will submit a forensic tampering complaint directly to your compliance department and subpoena your security logs. Silence. Give me your email, she said finally. I'll mark the clip for hold. Can't give it to you, but I'll make sure it doesn't go anywhere. I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back. There was only one reason Deidre would push a new policy so fast. She thought I was close to proving something. And she wanted me boxed in before I could move, but she moved too fast, and she didn't notice what the acceleration revealed. At 4:40, I got a text from Elena. Pool gates locked. Friend said she heard from her mom that I'm on a list now. A list, that was the word. Deidre wasn't just improvising as she went. This had been structured, pre-written, drafted like a campaign. The community bulletin, the access bans, the new policy. She was following a flowchart. And that meant she expected no one to push back. That night, I parked near the eastern boundary of Stone Hollow Ridge and walked the greenway path in the dark. No cameras there. I didn't need light to think. My phone buzzed again, an email this time. From Elena's science mentor, Dr. Kessler. Subject at the MIT Winter Summit update. In light of recent reports circulating online, the review board has decided to place your daughter's application under advisory hold pending resolution. This is not a rejection. Please inform us of any official clarification as soon as possible. I stared at it until my fingers went numb. They hadn't named her in the bulletin. They didn't have to. The ripple reached all the way to Cambridge. I forwarded the email to myself, added it to the evidence folder, and sat down on the edge of the walking path. I'd fought for truth in courtrooms, hearings, arbitration rooms, but I'd never seen it come from my own child. Not like this, not so surgically. The concrete felt cold under me. They didn't need to scream lies, just whisper enough of them in the right direction, and let the silence do the rest. But I had something they didn't. I knew how to turn silence into evidence. I stood, walked back to the car, and opened the drive where I kept my chain of custody templates. If they wanted to escalate into strategic isolation, I'd escalate into traceable violation. They thought pushing me into the shadows would slow me down. They forgot shadows hold the clearest shapes. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours between 2 a.m. and sunrise dissecting the HOA's video, the one they used to justify everything. I downloaded it from the bulletin the moment it was posted, frame-locked it in 3 separate programs, and started peeling back its layers like a coroner with a body he already knew had been murdered. Something didn't sit right. The lighting was off. Sun angle inconsistent with the timestamp metadata. The clip was short, 21 seconds long, but the shadows jumped mid-motion. That kind of shift doesn't happen naturally. It was a stitch job. I dropped it into a timeline scrubber I built years ago for corrupted deposition footage. A pulse graph lit up the anomalies. Frame duplication, spike desync, re-render jitter on 4 separate intervals. But the giveaway, the thing that clinched it, was the audio tail. Most surveillance clips have a hum, a subtle frequency drift in the background, like static from a faraway signal. This one didn't. It cut too cleanly. The end of the clip dropped off like someone had clipped the waveform with garden shears. And whoever did it forgot that real audio never ends in silence, not unless it's been tampered with. I froze the last frame and overlaid the timecode window. Then I ran a cross-reference against the HOA's publicly posted footage index. That's when the gaps showed up. Camera 14B's official upload time was 4:27:18, but the raw motion sensor logs, grabbed from a cached copy still available on the Orion Visual Maintenance page, showed the recording was triggered at 4:21:03, 6 minutes. Someone had removed 6 minutes. I stood up from my chair, my hands cold despite the heat running. The only person with access to both the footage and the right to publish was someone on the board. It wasn't an accident. I knew exactly what had been cut. Elena had paused by the sundial, the place she visited almost every day. Her posture had always been careful, deliberate. I taught her that. When you wear a brace, everything becomes intentional. There's no room for slouching, no freedom to move without thinking. She must have stopped there, adjusted it slightly, the way she always did when the pressure on her lower back built up. That was it. That's what Deidre had seen. A flick of the hand, a motion under the sweatshirt. And she'd twisted it into a weapon narrative. But the part where Elena looked around, smiled at the sundial, pulled out the notepad she sometimes used to log her shadow angles, gone, cut clean. I dropped the unedited motion logs and metadata screenshots into a folder marked Temp Evidence Hold. Then I fired off a formal preservation request to Orion Visual, this time with language Deidre couldn't squash. I cited Section 14.3 of the HOA's own bylaws. Any footage used to justify board decisions must remain preserved and intact for no less than 30 days, available for forensic review upon legal challenge. They had 8 days left. At 8:13 a.m., my email pinged. Stellan. Subject. Confidential. She asked me to trim it, said there were irrelevant parts. I didn't ask why. I shouldn't have done it. I didn't touch the audio, just the frame she flagged. You were right. There was more there. I leaned back, eyes closed. He had confirmed it. He hadn't confessed everything, not yet. But this wasn't nothing. It was the first solid fracture. The violation was built on a lie. Now I had proof the video used to support it had been tampered with, and someone on the board had participated in the alteration. I looked out the window. The sun was barely up. But I didn't need more light. I had what I needed. In federal court, this would qualify as bad faith spoliation. In a civil hearing, it meant the evidence they relied on to restrict Elena had no legal standing, and if I could prove intent, it would shift from violation to defamation, from silence to slander. They'd built this whole attack on the assumption I'd be another compliant parent afraid to challenge the board. They didn't think someone like me lived in their neighborhood. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to make threats. I was going to show them what truth looks like when it's rebuilt frame by frame. I waited until Elena left for therapy before opening the email from her school counselor. I'm reaching out with concern after several students mentioned Elena's name in relation to safety rumors online. We're not assuming anything, but if there's any official documentation you can share to clarify the situation, it would help protect her standing for both the Science Summit and general enrollment. I read it twice, then once more, rumors online. The phrase punched harder than it should have, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed that Deidre had succeeded in what she'd wanted all along. The HOA never had to say anything directly. All she had to do was light the match and let the smoke spread by itself. I clicked over to the HOA forum again. The post was still up, vague and weaponized, reminding all residents that safety protocols exist to ensure the well-being of every family. Any resident currently subject to a safety review is reminded not to circumvent restricted zones or communicate directly with board members outside of sanctioned channels. That was the second signal. The first was exclusion. The second was isolation. They were closing the walls. I walked outside to clear my head. The air was dry, and the sound of distant sprinklers carried across the yards. I took the path behind our row of houses, the one that curved past the back gate of the recreation building. The motion lights flicked on as I passed. Not unusual, but the one nearest the bike rack stayed lit even after I moved away. It shouldn't have. That's when I saw the small, blinking IR light above the pavilion awning. A new camera. It hadn't been there before. They were watching everything now. I pulled my phone out, snapped a few photos, then stepped back. If Deidre wanted a battle of visibility, she was about to get one. I wasn't going to match her with noise. I was going to bury her in precision. Inside, I opened my private forensic suite and began creating a parallel timeline of the entire incident. Motion logs, timestamp shifts, server ping intervals, security policy versions, Stellan's email, the school note, MIT's advisory hold, all of it. I layered it into a forensic storyboard, a method I'd used in court once to discredit a false accident claim. Each segment told a story the board had tried to split apart, but together it formed something too heavy to ignore. And then I added the last piece, Elena's notebook. I hadn't looked inside it in weeks, but I found it tucked beside her desk. Inside, her neat sketches of solar position charts curved across the pages, each one marked with dates, shadows, sunrise positions. One page had a little drawing of the sundial. The same afternoon she'd been accused, she'd written in pencil, "Angle at 4:21 matches summer test, lights returning." She had been logging the shift for a science model, while they accused her of hiding a weapon. I closed the notebook and stared out the window. This wasn't just a legal correction anymore. They had taken a moment of quiet reflection, of stillness, and they'd turned it into threat. They made my daughter's posture a crime, her therapy brace a risk factor, her stillness a suspicion. I knew what they'd try next. Push until we left. That's how it always ended in Stone Hollow. The loud family gets buried in paperwork. The quiet ones disappear without protest. The families with kids like Elena, different, quiet, medical, brilliant, moved away and didn't fight. But I wasn't going anywhere. I pulled up the draft of my legal notice and added 2 final lines. Evidence tampering confirmed by timestamp discrepancy and board witness. Demand for formal retraction of violation, public correction on HOA portal, and restoration of access privileges within 72 hours. And then, after a pause, I added the final sentence. Failure to comply will result in submission of full evidentiary timeline to the Civil Harassment Division of Fairfax County. I hit save and printed 2 copies, one for me, one for her. The moment Deidre opened that envelope, she'd know the board had overstepped, and this time, the damage would trace back to her name, not mine. The envelope was hand-delivered, not mailed. I walked straight to the HOA office, past the garden hedges trimmed to geometric precision, and the flagstone path meant to intimidate just enough to discourage drop-ins. I didn't ask for Deidre at the desk. I didn't need to. Stellan was already there. He stood just inside the front atrium, arms crossed, the weight of indecision hanging off him like wet clothes. He saw me and didn't look away this time. "I need 10 minutes, I said. He didn't argue, just nodded toward the side hall, away from the main desk and into the glass-paneled conference nook. Neutral ground. I placed the envelope on the table between us. His eyes didn't leave it. "It's all there," I said. Timestamp disparities, frame drop markers, metadata inconsistencies, and the internal logs showing the post went live before the footage was reviewed by anyone outside the board. Plus, your email. He flinched just slightly, enough to show he remembered exactly what he'd written. "I wasn't trying to cause harm," he said quietly. "You helped reframe a 17-year-old girl with a spinal condition as a security threat. You didn't have to plant the lie to be responsible for what grew out of it." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, eyes closed. "I didn't know she'd go that far." "You knew what she asked for." Silence. I slid the second page across the table. "This is a sworn draft affidavit. It names Deidre Mallon as the board member who requested removal of footage prior to publication. I'm asking for one thing, a signature, not for revenge, for the record." Stellan stared at it like it might burn through the table. "I still have to live here," he said. "So does my daughter." His hand hovered over the paper, then withdrew. Not refusal, hesitation. He wasn't ready, not yet. "She'll destroy it," he said finally. "The footage. The rest of it. If she thinks it's slipping away, she'll make it disappear." "She can't," I said. "Not all of it." He raised an eyebrow. "Orion Visual received a preservation request, and I already copied the logs from their maintenance cache. She can delete her local copy all she wants. It won't matter." That did it. He leaned forward slowly, like something in his chest had finally snapped out of alignment. Not broken. Realigned. He took the pen from my jacket pocket and signed the statement. No flourish, just his name. Stellan Vereen, HOA Vice President. "You'll protect that?" he asked. "It already lives in 5 cloud redundancies." He nodded, stood, and walked out without another word. I stayed a minute longer, letting the echo of the moment settle. Then I gathered the papers and walked to the exit. Deidre was standing just outside the front door, clipboard in hand. "You're not allowed to file evidence of tampering, threaten a lawsuit, walk a public sidewalk." I met her gaze and didn't blink. "Which one exactly am I not allowed to do today?" She said nothing. I held the envelope up for her to see. "This is your 72-hour notice. You won't be able to bury this, Deidre. The clip was altered. The metadata proves it. The logs prove it. And now the vice president of your board does too." Her jaw tightened, but her voice didn't come. "Do yourself a favor," I said. "Stop digging." I left her there, standing between the shade of the entryway and the heat of consequences. Back home, Elena was on the couch with her laptop, earbuds in, fingers tapping at a speed that told me she was coding again. Good. It meant she wasn't hiding, not yet at least. I placed the signed affidavit on my desk beside the forensic timeline. The board's defense had just fractured. The accusation couldn't hold without the video, and the video couldn't hold with the tampering exposed. Now we had motive, method, and witness. Next came execution. Deidre wanted a silent victory, an easy retreat by intimidation. But we weren't going quietly, not this time. Because the thing about people like her, what they never seem to understand, is that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, it's just the moment before the evidence speaks for itself. By noon the next day, I had the framework locked. I cleared off the long dining table, moved Elena's books to the side, and replaced them with labeled folders, flash drives, and backup printouts. Every item was organized by function, not just content. This wasn't for discovery. This was for demolition. The folder marked chain reversal contained the cross-verified footage comparisons. 2 versions. One from the HOA bulletin, one from Orion Visual's raw cache. Both had been re-encoded into identical formats to eliminate playback variation. I overlaid frame counters and dropped the audio tracks beneath for live sync. On playback, you could see the skips, hear the silence, watch the manufactured suspicion unravel second by second. The folder labeled Motive Timeline had Deidre's policy changes and digital bulletin posts layered over internal access records, retrieved via a public request to the HOA's IT vendor. The system didn't keep full content logs, but it did store edit timestamps. It showed edits to the Safety Concerns Bulletin 22 minutes after Stellan's email confession. The final folder, witness confirmation, held his signed affidavit, neatly scanned and notarized. I'd used a digital timestamping service tied to a blockchain anchor. If Deidre tried to challenge the validity, she'd have to dispute cryptographic time-locked proof in front of a civil judge. It wasn't just enough to prove Elena's innocence anymore. It had to be undeniable. I opened a blank page in my legal response draft. Not for the HOA, for the court. 3 copies would be filed, one for Stone Hollow's Civil Harassment Board, one for the Homeowner Mediation Review Office, and one for the Fairfax Civil Court records as a protective measure. Then I moved to the final step, reconstruction. I launched my forensic render suite and began syncing the preserved motion logs to the unedited footage. Each timestamp was visualized in real time. I marked the 6-minute deletion gap with a flashing yellow bar. In the margin, I labeled it Incident Area Removed in HOA Published Version. This wasn't a slideshow. It was a story, built for courtroom screens with clear frame overlays, no assumptions, and nothing speculative. I'd used this exact method in 3 separate cases where municipalities had tried to falsify records. In all 3, the footage fell apart under scrutiny. This time, it would collapse with sound. The synced waveform showed the audio cutoff. A flat line at the 21-second mark. No room tone, no wind, no ambient reverb, just engineered silence. Real surveillance doesn't end like that, not unless someone wanted it to. When it finished rendering, I exported 2 versions, one for hearing submission, one for backup. Then I built the summary brief. Clean, precise, bulletproof. Every claim, every date, every point tied back to a source. A screenshot. A server time signature. A witness statement. No conjecture, no emotion, just calibration and consequence. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't check my phone. I just worked. Because this wasn't about proving someone wrong anymore. It was about erasing the stain they tried to leave on my daughter's name. It was about restoring a moment that never should have been distorted in the first place. When I finally stood up, the room felt different, lighter. Not because it was over, it wasn't, but because now the structure existed. A framework Deidre couldn't shift. A story she couldn't rewrite. The more she spoke, the deeper she'd bury herself. Later that evening, Elena walked past the table, paused, and looked down at the render preview still looping on the screen. She said nothing at first. Then, barely above a whisper, she asked, "Do you think they'll actually watch it?" "They won't have a choice," I said. Her eyes lingered on the yellow bar, those missing 6 minutes, then moved to the waveforms. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "I know," I said. "Now they will too." She nodded once, then walked off toward her room. I saved the project and backed it up again, this time to a private hard drive I'd used for legal archive work. It had survived power surges, system wipes, even 2 encryption attacks. I would survive this, and so would she. The hearing wasn't scheduled yet, but I wasn't waiting for court to do the groundwork. Friday morning, I filed the formal evidence package with the Civil Harassment Division clerk. It wasn't just a formality, it was a procedural wall. From that moment on, Deidre couldn't destroy anything without risking criminal tampering. The preservation hold was now government-anchored, and any attempt to override it would leave a permanent chain of custody breach on public record. While the file uploaded into the official record system, I sent an encrypted copy to a colleague I trusted, Elena Bouchard, a courtroom systems integrator who had helped me design the timestamp auditing system 5 years back. Her reply came fast. "Confirmed. Footage desync is unmistakable. Your render's airtight. Add a crossfade loop on the final frame to force continuous attention in playback, standard in digital fraud presentation. Let me know when they blink." That was her way of saying, it's going to work. At home, I repackaged the render into a portable exhibit format. HDMI, ready, annotated, clean titles, no fluff. Just data that spoke for itself. I labeled it Exhibit A, Knox v. Stone Hollow HOA, Timeline of Manipulation. Then I made my final move. I submitted a quiet petition to the HOA's Architectural Oversight Committee, not the board, for installation of a private property security system facing outward, angled toward my front walk. It was a move they wouldn't expect, Once approved, it forced them to publicly acknowledge that I was concerned about HOA overreach. It also gave me standing to present the pattern of board retaliation as justification for personal surveillance, a move that tied back into First Amendment protected recording on private property. They couldn't deny it without justifying their own bans. It was a trap, and a perfectly legal one. That afternoon, Elena and I walked past the clubhouse again. She hadn't asked to go. She didn't look up as we passed, but I knew why she followed. She was watching the reaction, waiting to see if someone flinched, and someone did. A young board member, Lane, I think his name was, stood near the tennis court fencing, clipboard in hand. He spotted us, froze, and then did a double take, like a man realizing the temperature of the room had changed, and he was still wearing yesterday's suit. Good. Let the discomfort grow. The court date hadn't been set, but the pressure already had. Everything that came next would feel like sand under Deidre's feet, shifting, slipping, too unstable to stand on. That evening, a new bulletin popped up. Clarification regarding community oversight measures. It was damage control dressed up as formality. The board denied accusations of targeting specific residents, claimed all actions were based on cumulative safety indicators, and insisted no disciplinary designations have been made against any individual minor, which meant only one thing: they were backpedaling, hard, because they knew now. The video wasn't just flawed, it was dead weight, poisoned evidence, and if they continued forward, it would only drag the rest of the board into the same pit. I took screenshots, archived the page, cross-referenced it against the bulletin from the week before. They had revised 2 specific sentences without acknowledging the changes. That's metadata falsification on a community-wide level. That kind of trick might fool residents. It doesn't fool someone who audits timecode revisions for a living, Stellan called that night. He didn't waste time on greetings. "She knows," he said. "Of course she does. She's already trying to pin the footage edit on me. She can't. You didn't publish it. You never had the authority. I'm saying this as a courtesy, Aurelian. She's going to drag this through procedural hell. She won't get the chance." He went quiet. I added, "The hearing's coming. You and I both know what the render shows. It won't matter what she says when the timeline goes live on that screen. She's not used to being wrong," he said. "She's about to get familiar with it." After we hung up, I sat in the dark with the footage playing again on loop. No sound, just that flicker of missing frames, the soft pause between Elena's motion and the artificial cut. I watched the stillness in her body, the control, the exactness of the way she moved her arm, not wild, not erratic, just quiet and careful, like someone who knew the weight she carried and had made peace with it. They'd tried to turn that stillness into suspicion, but all it ever was strength. The summons came on Monday morning, folded into a thick cream envelope marked Notice of Special Hearing. The seal bore the county insignia, not the HOA's. That was key. It meant this had graduated from neighborhood infighting to a matter of public record. The hearing would be held in 48 hours at the county administrative annex. Not in a courtroom, but close enough. The board was being asked to defend its actions under civic transparency guidelines. I wasn't just a parent anymore. I was now the complainant in an official inquiry. The countdown had begun. I spent that afternoon finalizing the layout. The render had already been packaged for presentation, but I needed the delivery method to be exact. No pauses, no interruptions. I double-checked the projector compatibility with the county's AV system and embedded a silent cue track into the audio, coded vibrations only I could feel through the clicker so I'd know when to speak without looking. This wasn't going to be a performance. It was going to be a controlled detonation. By evening, I rehearsed the narrative once. No inflection, no flair. Just the facts as they were. The missing footage, the contradicting timestamps, the edited bulletin, the policy weaponized against a disabled teen. When spoken in order, the story didn't sound dramatic. It sounded surgical, which is what made it lethal. Elena sat nearby, cross-legged on the couch, watching me without watching me. "You sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded, then picked up her sketch pad. She didn't need to say more. At 9:14 p.m., I received an anonymous tip through my old professional line, a burner inbox I hadn't used in nearly 3 years. The subject line simply read, "For what it's worth." Attached was a screenshot. An internal HOA group message thread. Deidre had written, "He's manipulating footage. His daughter's behavior wasn't normal. We have every right to protect community safety. If this goes public, spin it as a misunderstanding. Blame the vendor. Make sure no one breaks rank." There it was. Intent. I opened the metadata. The screenshot was taken 2 days ago. And the sender, no name, but the IP matched a subnet I'd traced earlier to the HOA's own server, non-resident access. Someone on the board was cracking, possibly Lane. Didn't matter who. What mattered was this. Deidre knew the truth, and she was actively coordinating a cover-up. I flagged the message as supplemental evidence and encrypted it into the master folder. I wouldn't lead with it. It could be challenged without the full message log, but it would serve as reinforcement, a final nail. The night before the hearing, I walked the neighborhood alone. The sundial sat at the center of the park, bathed in low amber from the surrounding path lights. I stood in front of it for a long time, not thinking, just listening. A week ago, they tried to bury my daughter's name here. Now they'd watch it rise in the same place. I arrived at the annex building 10 minutes early the next day. Not out of nerves, out of discipline. Deidre was already seated when I entered, flanked by 2 board members, no lawyers. That told me she was betting on bureaucratic confusion to carry her through. The room was small, clinical, fluorescent lights, gray panel walls, a screen and a timer. The hearing officer sat in the center with a registrar beside her, typing notes. We were told to speak in order, no interruptions, facts only. I loaded the presentation. Deidre opened first, lengthy statements about community values, public responsibility, vague threats, and carefully worded concern. Not once did she name Elena, but every word hung in the air like a warning aimed at her. Then they called me forward. I didn't speak at first. I just hit play. The footage began. 2 windows, HOA version on the left, original version on the right. The room dimmed slightly and the render looped with soft cues. First play, no commentary, just the video. Second loop, frame markers highlighted. Audio waveform displayed. Drop-off point illuminated in red. The discrepancy wasn't subtle. When it ended, I said nothing. The hearing, officer leaned forward. "Mr. Knox, can you confirm the source and authenticity of this footage?" "I can. The original was pulled from Orion Visual's backup cache. HOA version was downloaded directly from the community portal, metadata included. And you claim this footage was used to justify access restrictions against your daughter? Without her knowledge, without review, and without disclosure of edits." Deidre shifted in her seat, but I wasn't done. I slid the signed statement forward. "This is a sworn affidavit from the HOA vice president confirming board-initiated edits prior to public release." Silence. Then I placed the screenshot of the internal message on the table. For what it's worth. The registrar stopped typing. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The message lay between us, pixelated and damning. The officer's eyes scanned the printout, then the affidavit, then the dual screen still paused behind me, on frame 1098. Elena standing by the sundial, her hand lifting to her lower back in a motion so calm and ordinary, it almost looked reverent. Deidre broke first. That message was private. It was taken out of context and obtained illegally. The hearing officer didn't blink. "You admit to sending it?" Deidre's mouth twitched. "I admit to concerns over resident safety. That message doesn't change the fact that this resident was observed acting suspiciously in a public area under HOA jurisdiction. And the edits to the video? I was informed they were minor, to remove dead space, irrelevant portions. I'm not a video expert. I trusted staff. Did you order the redaction?" She paused. Stellan stood up at the back of the room. He hadn't said a word all morning. I hadn't even realized he was in attendance. He stepped forward slowly, voice even. She did. The entire room shifted, subtle but enough. Deidre turned sharply. "Stellan, I was in the office when she pointed to the timestamps. She said it made the girl look guilty if we trimmed the moment she stepped back." That was the phrase she used. "More persuasive." The hearing officer turned back to me. "Mr. Knox, do you have anything further?" I nodded. "Just this." I turned to the screen and ran the third file, the synchronized motion log. It played like a heartbeat graph, each blip matching the motion sensors across the park's camera grid. The yellow flash marked where the HOA footage ended. The blue trace continued for 6 more minutes, corresponding perfectly with the preserved footage from Orion Visual. No voiceover, just rhythm, evidence in motion. When the clip stopped, I turned back to the panel. My daughter wasn't hiding anything. She wasn't a threat. She was adjusting her brace while doing sunlight angle logging for a science competition. What she was doing was learning, thinking, recovering, and being quiet. That silence was mistaken for secrecy. And then it was. Weaponized? I paused just long enough for the words to settle. Her name was never spoken in those bulletins, but the damage was done anyway. Doors started closing. Teachers pulled away. MIT flagged her file. The HOA didn't just accuse her, they erased her. The room was very still now. The officer folded her hands. We'll issue our ruling within 72 hours. I packed up the folders. Didn't look at Deidre as I passed her. She didn't look at me either. For the first time since this started, she had nothing to say. Outside the annex building, the wind was colder, clean, the kind of cold that bites at your collar and keeps you grounded. Stellan followed me to the parking lot. She's not going to walk away quietly, he said. She won't get to walk away at all. She'll blame me. I looked at him. You signed the truth. That's more than most people do. He gave me a nod, not confident, not proud, just resigned. But there was something else behind his eyes too. Relief, maybe. By the time I got home, Elena was sitting on the porch with her laptop on her knees and her brace visible under a loose cardigan. For once, she wasn't trying to hide it. She looked up and offered a tired smile. You play it? Twice. She nodded. They believe it? They don't need to. They can't unsee it. She closed the laptop and hugged it to her chest. I want to go back to the sundial, she said. We sat together a while longer, quiet. The kind of quiet Deidre never understood. The kind that wasn't guilty or evasive or dangerous, just real. And tomorrow, the whole neighborhood would hear it. The ruling arrived exactly 69 hours later. No fanfare, no announcement, just a subject line so plain it almost felt mocking. Outcome of special hearing. But the moment I opened it, the weight of the last week shifted. The board's access restrictions were declared unlawful. The safety bulletin was ordered removed within 1 hour. A public correction would be posted for 30 days. And the county recommended an external audit of Stone Hollow Ridge's governance procedures, citing evidence of deliberate manipulation in community materials. Deliberate manipulation. They didn't soften it. They didn't hide behind polite phrasing. They named it. I forwarded the ruling to Elena, then printed a copy and taped it to the fridge. It felt symbolic, permanent. She walked in minutes later, hair still damp from her shower, back brace clicking faintly under her sweatshirt. Her eyes moved from the fridge to me, then back again. They believed it, she said. They didn't have a choice. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, but her posture, usually guarded, was open for once. The tension she'd been carrying since the day this started slipped from her shoulders like something she finally had permission to set down. At noon, the correction went live on the HOA portal. No flourish, no apology. Just a firm statement from the hearing officer. The referenced resident was not involved in any unsafe conduct. The prior report was based on altered materials and does not reflect factual events. And beneath it, a requirement. All prior implications or rumors are to be disregarded. Retaliatory behavior by board members or residents will be subject to review. If silence had been their weapon, then clarity became mine. By evening, neighbors began drifting by the park, hesitant, curious, cautious in the way people are when they realize they've misjudged a situation they didn't fully understand. A few offered small nods. One woman dropped off a card that simply said, "Your daughter did nothing wrong," wishing her success at MIT. But I didn't go to the park until later, after sunset, when the lantern lights flickered across the pathways like miniature beacons. The sundial stood exactly where it always had, centered in the stone circle, casting a long shadow even in the artificial glow. Elena stepped beside it and placed one hand on the cool edge. "This place doesn't feel ruined," she said softly. "Just reclaimed." I nodded. "Because the truth came back to it." She brushed her thumb along the carved markings, small grooves worn down by decades of weather and years of her quiet visits. I watched her, not just as a father, but as someone who understood how time leaves traces on people, just as it does on stone. This sundial had witnessed every part of this story: the accusation, the deletion, the reconstruction, and now, finally, the restoration. "Do you think she'll resign?" Elena asked. "Maybe, maybe not. But the board won't survive untouched, and she'll never make a decision in silence again. Not after this." Elena looked up. "Because of your evidence?" "No, because you didn't break, Elena. You kept standing, even when they tried to turn your stillness into guilt." Her eyes softened. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse into me the way she did the night the bulletin first went up. She just nodded with a steadiness that felt like sunrise after a very long winter. We walked home side by side, the night air cold, the streets quiet, the neighborhood suddenly unfamiliar in the best possible way. The hearing was over. The correction was public. The lie was dead. And the community, whether they admitted it or not, had watched a teenage girl outlast a system built to silence her. Back at the house, I sat at my desk and looked over the final evidence render one more time. Not because I needed to, because endings deserve reflection. I closed the laptop and let the room settle. This wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder. In a world full of noise, truth still moves with precision. And when you bring precision into the light, lies have nowhere left to hide. Thank you for watching this story unfold with us. Before you go, tell me in the comments, what language do you speak at home?